Welcome to the shed. It's been quite painful to spend the last 10 years in conversations with people who manage, lead or own or work in organisations of all different sizes and all different kinds in all different parts of the world. Anything from a very, very small cafe to a large multinational financial corporation to an organisation delivering frontline healthcare to an organisation creating computer games to a company in the insurance industry to a theatre company. And in nearly all cases where those organisations are formed in a formal way, be that a public limited company, a private limited company, a public organisation, a charity, a social enterprise, what's caused me pain has been the pain that people are saying organisational life is causing them. And one view of that is that work itself is inherently painful because we'd rather not be doing it. And even in what is sometimes called lifestyle businesses, there come moments in the afternoon when you're doing your receipts or where you'd rather be at home with the family and there's some late night paperwork to do, where even where the core work might be causing a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction, there's a great number of hours that multiply to literally years of your life where you're engaged in activity around what we might call doing things, actions, that the business or the organisation seems to demand of you through what has become repetitive process. And essentially the human being engaged in them is doing them because they have to, because they feel it's what the organisation requires to be efficient, to be effective, to survive, simply because they've been doing it out of habit for years, because they fear somebody higher up will in some way discipline them if they don't continue to do that work, or simply because they're just in a flow of repetition that may even not be habitual, it simply is continual. Now, the pain comes from people looking back on that work as essentially something they wish they didn't have to do, that they wish wasn't so repetitive, and at its worst there's an expression called soul destroying. And the thing that causes me pain is that if I might cherry pick from some of those organisations I just mentioned, maybe I'll cherry pick the theatre company for example, or maybe I'll cherry pick something vocational like frontline healthcare where you're saving lives, that the core purpose of even those organisations that might be lighting up someone's soul with purpose and passion is I've had too many conversations where people have looked to the work that they're doing as being joyless, as being boring and dull, as being pointless, and ultimately even where it seems to be serving the purpose of the organisation, it certainly doesn't seem to be serving the longer term purpose of the person doing the work. Now that creates a really interesting discussion that's probably been being had for a long time in different ways, that does work, when it becomes, I guess, repetitive particularly, have to become joyless. And I want to suggest that the organisational form that largely still dominates in the public sector, in the private sector, in the large or the small organisation, namely the hierarchy, is dead, and it needs to be laid to rest. Now this isn't coming from some anti-hierarchical, anti-capitalist, reactionary place at all. It's simply based on the idea that humanity itself, even through the 20th century, through the development of even more self-awareness, the idea that the question of what am I here for has become certainly it's become the kind of property of a lot of people in the West. Still, people trying to survive in so many parts of the world, that existential question isn't there. But for people in the world of formalised work in the West, the question of what's my purpose, why am I here, will I make a difference, will I look back on a good life, will my family feel proud of me, will I be able to tell stories to my grandchildren that I'd want to tell them? Well, all of that kind of urge is not being met by work in its form, and particularly the hierarchical form. And unfortunately, what we haven't managed to do in academia, in research and in practice is offer viable alternatives that have caught fire and diffused widely, that has been seen as the viable alternative to the hierarchy. Yes, there are collaborative structures, flat structures, there are people running organisations in different ways, but for most people those things are quirky, those things are hippie, those things are off the wall, and most of all, they're not yet tried and tested in terms of any mainstream data. If they were a medicine, there simply haven't been enough trials to say that this medicine is safe to eat. Not to eat, well, to, heal you. So that's our starting point in this conversation. If hierarchy, and organisational hierarchy, where tasks and not just people are created in the form of a level, be that what's called a bill of materials in breaking down a product into its tiniest parts, the division of labour, or even the division of control, where higher up the organisation you tend to be paid more and you tend to have more control and authority over the people lower, that this organisational model has not changed probably. It was there even in the Bible, the hierarchy going up to the angels right up to God. It was there in the religious hierarchies, it was there in military hierarchy, it still is, and the military kind of religious model of the people closer to heaven are up the front at the altar, and the people sitting in rows, the congregation, the less clever are sitting there as witnesses, as receivers of what comes from on high. Now, I'm not going to go into all the stuff around leadership at the moment, but I am going to stay focused on the hierarchy and the idea actually that in most cases of those people I spoke to, hierarchies have not actually worked. And most organisations have delivered what you might say is laterally from the input to the output of a product, often in spite of the hierarchy, the bureaucracy that goes with it, the grapevine and the uncertainty that goes with it, the ego trips around power that goes with it, the lack of trust, the departmental and compartmentalisation of people. And that's all been replicated in the realm of digital working, with hierarchies just happening via emails with people fearfully copied in. Just check your inbox tomorrow to see that. So I'm just going to leave us with a thought, and the thought is it's time to really think through an alternative model of work. An alternative model that isn't some new clever ideas that still leave the hierarchy in place, still leave the notion of senior management at the top, or disinterested shareholders even higher up commanding things, but actually ways of work that will allow products and services that are needed and that are useful to the world to be created and delivered without the need for models of work that largely are seen by the people who work in them as soulless, grey, soul-destroying, boring, pointless, and ultimately unrewarding for those people in the longer term story of their lives. And here's the hint that I've got so far that you'll hear from other broadcasts from the shed coming up. I think the future business is going to be called a conscious business. I don't think it's going to be based on hierarchy as the default model. Where hierarchy exists, it's going to be temporary and it's going to emerge out of the need of the moment. The new organisations are going to be improvisational. Repetition is going to be a kind of spiritual practice, and where it becomes boring, it's going to be valued as a sacrifice, and the reward and the kind of recognition that goes with that sacrifice is going to turn current payment systems on its head. Most of all, though, the hierarchy, which is about the delivery of action, will change to an organisation based on a circle, and the method will no longer be control and decision making and solutions, but quite the opposite. It'll be an organisation that is continually improvising, emerging, asking questions, sensing internally and externally in a playful way. Accuracy will be key, but it'll be a part of a mindful way of doing work. And ultimately, at the heart of the organisation will be constantly renewed purpose. The method, though, will be inquiry. Organisations, their main process will no longer be strategy, but a constant, almost sensual engagement with the internal and external environment. And its method will be inquiry, the asking of questions. And that won't be relentlessly boring, because those questions will be based on human creativity, spontaneity, emergence, improvisation, and most of all, to quote Alice in Wonderland, curiosity.